You're listening to the Snyder & Associates webinar series, a civil engineering, planning, and design firm focused on thinking beyond engineering to improve the quality of life within the communities we serve.
Hi, I'm Chadd Kahlsdorf. I'm a civil engineer with Snyder & Associates, and I'm here to present about effectively informing your elected officials and the citizens of your community on your project and your spending requirements. This is one of those softer skills that is probably almost as important as technical ability, as this is the basis of getting projects approved and being able to communicate the importance of what we are doing and what you are doing in your community, and hopefully be able to lead to future projects and more future successes with them. Snyder & Associates has been in business for over 40 years. We work on a wide variety of civil infrastructure projects, a wide variety of communities, small to large. We are based in the Midwest. We found that there's just some bedrock principles that we adhere to make sure that we can successfully communicate that provides a better outcome in our efforts. The goal of this presentation is how to communicate with key stakeholders, whether they're appointed or elected, so your city council or board of directors. The business and developers, they're kind of in the same ilk. They have a more financial focus in the community. And then your residents, the people along your corridor that you're working with, to make sure that they're understanding for all of these groups to be able to build a shared vision of what's going to happen. We're really going to highlight how your planning activities drives communication and why it makes the planning work that you do critical. Talk about what to communicate, and then we're going to talk about how to craft a message to make sure that this is impactful, so it kind of lands and guides people to where they need to go to understand what we are doing in our project work. The basic principles of effective communication, we are explaining the why. We are going to be clear and concise and timely in our messaging. We're taking the information we gather from planning, and we're going to clearly point out why this is important. We're going to say in the words that are concise so that people can understand, and we're going to present it in a timely manner that people can talk and understand before the project impacts them. Part of this effective communication model is also understanding the difference between, are you selling information to them, trying to get them on board with your project, or is this just simply informing what's going to be happening? How do you gather information if you're seeking that input to kind of craft the project? Informing is just telling them, this is what we're doing. The decision's already made. We're just informing you what's going to happen. The other part of effective communication, you're going to address concerns. You're not going to dodge any hard questions. You're going to be forthright and transparent about what the process is and what drives the process, and then help people resolve these concerns. We will also kind of briefly talk about method of delivery, understanding how to deliver this message or the best method to educate the people that you're working with or communicating with. And you need to do this more than once. It'll be a continuous process that you are always educating people. It's really important to realize that most people know nothing about how civil infrastructure projects really make civilization happen. We need to make sure that they understand the importance of what we do and why we're doing it. As we're communicating things to people, if they don't know about it, did it even happen, right? One of our goals as communicators is that they understand that they are benefiting from the work that we're doing. This is one of those things that we really want to drive on. Getting to some fundamental ideas here. Messages have two goals. You're trying to make a connection and provide meaning. The message needs to address why what is happening is happening. We are justifying the benefit, and we're trying to point out that it's totally worth the sacrifice. That comparison of like, oh, it's going to be painful, you're destroying my front yard to put something in, but that sacrifice is short term. The new road and the smoothness will be totally worth it. Part of this also is that we're explaining what is happening. You're explaining the construction process. We're not asking for critique at this stage. We're informing them what is happening. This idea of having a communication plans may feel a little political, but this is not a political exercise. This is not a politician trying to spin away bad behavior or we're trying to hide mistakes. This is an honest attempt to explain to people what is happening in their community and why. An informed public will be able to understand the benefits of the process that you're going through and the projects that you're performing. This is why planning matters. You need to develop at least two plans, the communications plan and a capital improvement plan. And the third one, definitely a funding plan, especially if you're going to go offer some outside funding. The capital improvement plan sometimes will have the funding plan included in it, but that'll kind of depend on your size of your department. Your capital improvement and CIP funding plan, plus your communication plans, how you're going to distribute this information, will drive you to have an informed public. And that's what you really need to do. If you fail to have this plan in place, you're going to have a tough time explaining. It's going to make your life harder. So a little bit of hard work on the front end will make your life easier on the back end. You need to have a plan on how you're going to replace every component of your system. everything gets replaced. As part of that planning exercise, you need to have a clear definition for repair and replacement of components. Make sure this is written down. This especially helps as you're talking to elected officials if they have questions about why you're replacing a mile worth of sewer line. This will help you be able to explain that to them. Make sure that all your maintenance work is included, specifically the manufacturer's recommended maintenance activities, so you don't void any warranties, which is probably a little bit more than some communities I have seen. But making sure you meet the manufacturer's requirement for specific components is important to make sure that you keep your items in good working order. And if there's a warranty issue where you'd have to send something back, that you are within the maintenance legalese on that. As part of your planning, one of the things to know is how your system is performing. And the question is, are you verifying that performance? There's a lot of design assumptions that are made, but once something is actually built, it's important to make sure that it's meeting the design performance that has been established. So that will help also inform you if you need to make some changes to your system sooner. The other thing I would say is that in your basic planning is, can you take advantage of opportunities that are in front of you? And this kind of goes to a bigger conversation about replacing of components inside your system earlier. Let's say if you're a sewer department, someone is pulling up your road, and let's say the pipe in the ground is 50-ish years old, which is kind of at that zone where it'd be beneficial for you to just replace that pipe or water main up front. You would want to wait till that breaks, then you have to tear up and repair the road, or do you want to take advantage of the opportunity to put it in now while the pavement's off the road and you can save yourself some cost? Being able to take care of those opportunities is really important. Some next level planning things that you want to consider: understanding the limits of your staff, what you will have to do in the near future, what stuff that you can do, and what you need to send out of the house. And if you want to do more stuff in-house, increase your capabilities, planning for that, finding some funding for you to train your staff or buy equipment to be able to do more, making sure there's a very clear understanding of what you can do and what you have to hire a consultant for. The big thing is, imagine your worst emergency situation for your system. How quickly can you recover from that? Do you have some funding set aside to recover that? It's always hard when you're waiting on FEMA to pay for money. It's going to be a long time before you get reimbursed on that. And how much juggling are you going to have to do to be able to pay something before it gets restored? Can you replace components to make that burden easier? Being out of a service for a couple months is one thing, or a couple days or a week, but it's definitely different once it stretches on to 6 months. Being able to have an understanding of your system and then planning repairs to make yourself more resilient against the worst situation that you currently have. Then the other thing is, how quickly could you expand your system? Say there's a new development that wants to go in a part of your community. It's going to take half of your system's current capacity. How quickly could you expand to fit that need? If you have to rebuild the whole system, you might want to have a consideration on that. Start improving your system to bring it up to more modern standards. Understand how your system is operating so you know what your actual capacity is. All these answers to these questions will drive your message and your prioritization of your projects and help you become a better expert for your system. That way you can always answer clearly and concisely about what is happening in your system and why each project matters. Your CIP, the long-term CIP, should have a plan to replace absolutely every component in your system. And that can sound overwhelming. The key is going to be prioritization. A master list of everything, then put your top 3 to 5 things at the top of the list, and then everything works to that. If you don't like 3 to 5, you can do first year, 5 year, and then longer. This is a way to plan to attack your system, to improve its resiliency, and to start rebuilding some redundancy in your system and to be able to replace everything. The goal being that you're going to replace everything sometime. And if you can get started on doing that for this community, if you're not there for the entire plan to replace everything, you can put yourself and your community in a good position going in the right direction. And it's really important to understand that mountains are moved by very small shovels, one scoop at a time. Prioritization is understanding the key components that need to be replaced first and then start building out from there. How good is your CIP? Well, how long does the project sit on your list? How many times do other projects come in before then and then move things around? If things break and push things down the project list, then your CIP is not focused enough. Or if it's leadership who comes in like, oh, we need to change this and we need to reprioritize your projects, then there needs to be a bigger conversation with them on how to prioritize stuff. The other thing I would say is if you have projects on the list for a long time, always make sure the cost is being refreshed. That should be probably every other year, if not every year, just with wild price escalations and things like that. There's nothing worse than getting to go ahead to do a project and to realize that it costs you twice as much as it did when the price was first established. So now you did your CIP planning, you understand your system, you built expertise about your system with you and the staff, you've drawn in all that information, and now you have something to talk. That is the what of the message. As you start to craft the message, the first thing you need to do is you need to understand the power dynamic of who you're communicating to. If it's going up to boards and elected official people who approve contracts and approve things, the message needs to be different than to people who are just there to be informed. Understanding that power dynamic is quite important. Remember that you and your staff are the experts. You have worked on these plans, you work inside the system, you're there day by day, and you are all on the same page about the projects and the prioritization of them. You built it, you're the expertise, you're understanding the power dynamic. You got to realize that there are a lot of motivations to the way people respond to information when they receive it. All human responses are founded in emotions. Everything is an emotional response, whether that's the way somebody was disciplined as a child, to the way they've received information before from their long-term partner, for all these other human experiences that you're tapping into that you know nothing about. All human responses come from them. All of these responses are on the great spectrum of things that happen in people's life, and you're getting a replay of some of these things. A lot of humans don't want to be a decision maker. They don't want to decide, but they are absolutely willing to provide input and to critique what you've done. They love critiquing. We all have this similar need to do that. I think based on those things, it's important to remember that it's best not to take it personal. If you can leave it, this is the project, this is about work, and that the project that we're presenting is the best for the community and it has nothing to do with impacting somebody on a personal level. That's important. That's where you want to keep it. I think as you talk to people, especially people who tend to be emotional, if you can be very clear about it not being personal, I think it helps them kind of unwind and come back to the center and really talk about what we're presenting in our messages. As we're talking about these motivations, understand that the response is going to be emotional depending on the scale. There's going to probably be critical first, and then we need to make sure that it doesn't go personal. I can't reiterate this enough. I've failed on this myself many a time in my life, in many situations. But the times that have been the most successful are the ones when let the people be emotional if they need to be, take the feedback they're providing, and not to make it personal. I think that'll probably keep you most of the way to where you need to be successful in communicating with people. Now you got some emotional motivation in the background. Let's craft your message a little bit tighter. Make sure you use short sentences, strong verbs. Keeping the communication simple. Nuance is not something that should ever be in a written text. There's no such thing as a sarcasm font. Everything that's written needs to be very clear. Don't get too long in explaining things, especially in written forms. Keeping it short sentences and strong verbs, your message won't be lost, and you'll be able to control it better. Always explain what is controlling the approach of a project. Whether it's adjusting to a federal regulation, you're meeting an end user need somewhere in town, whether it's an aesthetic thing, this is part of your standard replacement and repair programs. Always explain whatever the controlling approach is going to be on this and why it's happening. People like to feel like they're somewhat in control of their life. A project where you're telling you're going to come tear up the front of their house or the back of their house or limit their ability to do things is one of those things that really can drive some people quite crazy. But if we can explain what the controlling approach is going to be, this is explaining the why here, you'll be able to get some input. And I have also found that as you explain this, that like, oh, this is a federal regulation thing, they will also kind of bemoan the existence of the federal government or these federal regulations, or you'll have a bonding moment that you two are also bound by these regulations and this is going through. So it's a way to be able to build some common ground. Words are the worst way to communicate. The great Stan Lee from Marvel Comics is a great example of this. He was in the Army in World War II, and he was part of their movie department and did a lot of things. One of the key things that he did to overcome one of the military's problems at that time was they had a lot of procurement officers, or the pay officers, had a 6-month training program. And they couldn't train them fast enough to really grow the Army because they couldn't pay the men their money as they were going through training. So that was a constriction point in the process of really expanding the Army. And Stan Lee was able to come, take that 6 months worth of training, basically do a comic book about it, and they were able to knock it down to 6 weeks with a high passing rate. They were able to start checking out these pay officers and then expand the Army at the same time. The visualization, to be able to see it, makes the reception better on the people you're communicating it to. The important thing here is you have one message, that it's always the same for your project, for your CIP, that it's a unified message going out. This includes getting your staff on board. I've had an experience where you talk to someone, the public works director or the director of the utility, and then you go out in the field and then you hear secondary stories from field staff who are just trying to be chatty and nice and who may not be on the same page. It's really important to have one message, get everyone on the same page, because there's nothing that can really sow discord amongst residents is to have different messages going out. So it's one message, but you want to have it on 2 levels. I like to call it the full mill. You're absolutely everything. It's technically in depth, and people can fully explore the range of the why, and then just your bite size, just a taste message. Most people just want the taste. That's all they need to know. It's much smaller, it's quicker, it's much more concise, but it's just a quick kind of an elevated conversation kind of level thing. But the important part of that is that it always has the same why. So once you have your message crafted, depending on the need, you usually start out with the bite. And then if people really need to know more, you can really dive into the full in-depth message. You need to determine how you're going to deliver that. On some projects, depending on the scale, it's been 3 or 4 public meetings. We're going to inform everybody, have that interaction a couple of times to make sure that people are fully informed through the design process and get input, to where it's 1 public meeting per project to 1 public meeting once a year for all the planned projects. It really kind of depends on the community and the administration there. The form needs to be dictated that way. If your organization has a communications manager or a communications department, working within their plan is the way to go. You don't necessarily have to develop how to distribute the stuff. You can provide input for the frequency, but at the same time, they probably should have more input on this than you want to follow their plan for the other types of communications that come out from the administration. So multiple forums, public meetings. You can do individual one-on-one kitchen table meetings. If you have a couple of harder people to work with, whether everything just gets posted to the website, they can sign up for emails, whether you do mass mailings, YouTube, text messages, it all really depends on what fits your community best in the form that they're going to receive it. There's always debate too about how do you make them read it, and that's not possible. I think that's one of those things that there needs to be an understanding of that. We'll provide all the information we can, and that's relevant to them, but they're the ones who are going to have to consume it. The message won't change. It's really kind of how you deliver it. The other thing you want to make sure that you're very clear on is how frequently you're going to do something, and then who's going to deliver it. Is this always going to be Public Works Director, the face of the community? Is it going to be mayor or city administrator? Is it going to be board director? Really understand who's going to be telling what in what format. And it could be multiple messengers for different formats. And then I would also say you should also look to people who are very good at presenting these kind of things. But depending on your audience, you want to have multiple messengers. I had an excavator operator, someone who you would not think would be interested in dealing with the public or talking to people. He was always the best at explaining things on this one project. And so if the residents had complaints as we were rebuilding a road in their neighborhood, and they would come up to him and talk, and he basically built his own best friends club there on the street, and he was able to inform people what was going on, and they trusted him a lot. The messenger is important depending on the level, but again, leave it open to people who are able to communicate clearly and who are able to build rapport with other people. And that kind of goes into some other general principles. I think the first one, being open to all ideas, taking everyone's input is important. You don't have to act on all of it or any of it, but being able to have the public feel like they're heard at the appropriate time. Again, if you're going to issue a contract and you're waiting for city council to approve it, at that city council meeting, you shouldn't take input on changing the design, right? It's all time and place. Be open to taking the input, especially after you start sending out communications. You don't have to act on it, but you need to receive it and think it over. You want to build a relationship with trust, like I said. This will help you in the managing of expectations. So that way, if you're being honest and being truthful, that trust will grow, and the people will count on you to do what you can. Again, in construction, things change on the fly sometimes, but being able to communicate, you can't always promise that it won't be negative for them for a while. Having your driveway knocked out and your front yard destroyed for a while, that's going to be painful. So you need to be very clear on it. Something is difficult, you need to explain that it's going to be difficult. But that's kind of a baseline understanding of telling them the truth, that way they can understand what they can expect. And as things change, you inform them that those things change. The other thing I will say is don't pander to your public. While it may feel like easing them into what's going on, it's also distrustful. It builds a false pretense with them. And you want to minimize that as much as possible. They need to expect from you being the expert, honesty, and direct communication, and anything that can disrupt that needs to be eliminated from your messaging. I worked with a guy who would call people who are very difficult to deal with PITAs, and it's pain in the, you can pick your favorite A now for someone who's difficult. And it really comes down to the simple fact that some people are just unhappy. There's nothing you can do about that. But you always need to be nice to them. Never let them know that they get to you. Sometimes these people just need to vent. Their life is hard. There's things that are going wrong. And after that, they'll get better, and then you can talk and be able to be clear. But some people just aren't that way. They're very rare, but they do exist. Always be nice to them. And then eventually the project will be over and you don't have to deal with them. You do need to track communication with them, informing your city engineer or your public works director or city administrator, depending where you're at, of what this person is saying and complaining about. So that way there's a tracking of it. So if they decide to call up the mayor or somebody and really chew on them, they'll know it's coming, and they know that that's been a problem for a while. Some thoughts about key demographics we talked about before. Your appointed or elected leaders. It's important to realize that these people, they've won a popularity contest. They're going to come in, they're going to be bright-eyed. They have the voice of the people on their back, and they're going to get stuff done. They have a lot of voices in their ears of what needs to be done to make changes and to make things better. One of the key things that you will have to do right up front is to make sure they understand the process of how public works projects go. They understand public bidding laws. They understand that just because they're elected, they don't get a magic wand that makes things happen. There is a process. Make sure that they understand the process and what restricts the process, whether that's regulation, whether that's city code, and to understand where they fit into that process. This is a key educational point here. I can't put a number to how many times I've heard, we're going to put in a whole bunch of parks and we're going to put in a whole bunch of this. And you have to sit down and talk to people and tell them like, well, that's nice, but that costs money. And the money is allocated this way because this sewer project needs to happen. That road needs to be repaired. That road needs to be fixed. Not saying that parks aren't important, but the prioritization at the time was definitely to take care of these projects and then have the discussion about what it means if you were to change things. Again, building on your CIP, the solid planning that has been done, you're able to clearly communicate why things are placed the way they are. And if they want to change something, then have a conversation about how we can change it to make sure all the things that are important to the community get done. You need to be their expert. You're their guide. You're there to provide all the answers to all the questions they might have about your system and why things are done a certain way and why they were done in the past, if you know. Again, strive to have that depth and level of understanding of why things are the way they are and why things are going and where they're going, is that you can clearly communicate the why. If they want to drive a change in those things, you can have that discussion in a meaningful way. The other thing that's really important, I heard this from a very wise old public works director as we were trying to get a painful project through, is that as an individual, all your elected leaders or appointed leaders are just one vote. So if you have one person who really doesn't like this project and everyone else does, they're just one vote. And 5-1 usually passes. So while you want to keep them all together as a group and have a unanimous approach, sometimes you got to do what you got to do to get things passed. And a 3-2 vote will pass a contract or a project or a scope or fee, just as well as 5-0 or vote would be. This is understanding your power dynamic a little bit more, how united people are. And I'll use a city council example, but I think on any level is very different, right? These people are motivated by or are willing to go out there and put their name and reputation on the line, and they get some power and they're making things happen. They feel good about that. But the internal dynamics and the internal politics of the group can be, really contentious. Some are just there because no one else wanted the seat and they were talked into it by the mayor or somebody else, and they just go along for the ride. So their motivations individually to be there is unique, but also it really depends as they're there longer too, like the motivations change as well. And sometimes they have bigger political aspirations and they need to make a name for themselves. And so this becomes a different kind of beast as it goes along from newly elected, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed person who's changing the world to something else. So understanding each official's individual motivations or trying to understand that and working with them, and then also working with them as a group is going to be kind of part of your challenge as you go through this. But again, the message is the same. You're the expert. That's the best that you can do to help kind of push those things through. To kind of deal with the individual and group dynamics, I know there's a lot of communication that can go along, but make sure to provide input every opportunity you have. So whether it's a council work session or it's a special meeting or it's city council or whatever, make sure you provide input, whatever that may be, especially to make sure that it aligns with kind of what you have planned for your community and for your system. This is an important thing that you always provide input so they know where you stand and they can have an understanding of what their decisions and how it negatively or positively impacts what you're trying to do. Every chance you get, provide some input. Dealing with businesses. I think this is the hardest group to deal with personally. It seems like every time you bring up something to them, it's, why are you trying to shut me down? Why are you trying to remove me from the community? Again, it's a tough job on a big box store. They have very tight numbers. They are monitored tightly for their revenue. Their concern is to make sure that they're being profitable and meeting their numbers is a big driving factor. The best way to deal with them is to make sure that you are doing long lead coordination. If you know you're going to be tearing up a corridor where businesses are, that they know it's coming. You can start broaching the subject early, well before anything's impactful. And that way we can make arrangements for them, making sure that you don't impact their operations and what's going on. Whether it's delivery schedules or traffic access or additional signage, it's important to get on that early and stay on it because it drives so much of what happens there. There's a difference between small businesses where you basically have the owner who lives at their shop and does everything. And the desperation of being put out of business is a real thing. They might be closer than you might understand, but helping them meet their goals and trying to present to them all the positives, how you're going to make their life easy is a real key thing. And making sure that you're providing adequate accommodation so that they don't miss business, because it can be really a life or death issue for their business. Corporate is a different thing. Again, it's still trying to get as much money as possible, but they definitely will have a bigger perspective on it. They can bear a little bit more and shut down, and say it's a big box store where you'll have multiple entrances into their parking lot. That's different than shutting down the whole street of frontages for small businesses. This is kind of more key on the corporate thing, is identifying the right people in the leadership structure to talk to. You're going to have to figure out who in the big corporate structure is the operations lead for the site, and getting in with them early and explaining and working with them and the general site manager is an important thing. Making sure that you identify the right people to make sure that the decision makers are in the room and the advisors to the decision makers are on board with your project. So residents, I think this is kind of easier to relate to. Most people have a home somewhere. You just have to think about how you would feel if someone said they were going to bring a trencher or backhoe and dig up your front yard for something. How would that make you feel? And how would you feel about the restoration of that? And how closely would you watch that? So I think there's an inherent connection between most of us and people in neighborhoods we work around. We can kind of relate to them. What you want to do is build allies in your community. If it's a smaller community you work in, word travels fast. And you want to make sure that you do everything you can to be upfront and clear about what's happening. And so that way, when someone in 2 neighborhoods over knows you're coming with a project, that they'll be able to kind of trust you. But it has to be, at the end, an overall good experience. Consistency from all staff. It's really a project killer when staff are communicating something different than what is coming from the main channels of your organization. Be very wary of making concessions, because once you do once to one resident, you're going to have to do probably at least half a dozen times, and probably going forward on every project. Don't write a check that you're not willing to cash. That's not part of the project. If it does appear like favoritism, it's just going to open up a can of what about me's. It's like giving one child a cookie in front of a group of other children. They'll all want cookies and probably more. Just be wary of that and make sure that you can justify why you're doing what you're doing, because that becomes a clear line. If something were to go to, like, say, city council, and then you can explain, well, we built an extra long driveway for so-and-so because it would help our staging and part of the agreement to have access. Writing those things down is an important part of your communication to your leadership. Do what you say. In construction, when the plan changes, you update the plan and you let everyone know as quickly as you can. Again, clear, concise, and timely, and this will make your life a little bit easier. The final thoughts here to kind of wrap this up. It's important to remember that public projects need public support. Your job, in addition to maintaining the infrastructure, is to make sure that the public appreciates the infrastructure and continues to improve people to spend on infrastructure. The more you can build a relationship of trust with the residents and build that public support, the easier you'll make your job. I would say you also would want to hold a project review at the end of a project as you go through these things, especially with your CIP planning and your messaging, to talk about what went well, not just in like the actual execution of the project, but what went well in the communications plan on the project. Were people well informed? Did you receive a lot of complaints? There were a lot of people really angry. What could you do differently? Is it the message that needs to change, or people just weren't going to the website you set up, and so you need to have more direct conversation? It's a good way to kind of figure out what went well for you and your staff, and then compare it to how did that go up to your elected leaders, how did it go to the residents, and kind of review what you need to do going forward. Just because your plan didn't work this time in communicating doesn't mean it was wrong. Maybe you land on the worst block in the world where everyone's super cranky and just don't want to listen to you. Doesn't mean it was the wrong plan. It was wrong for that situation. So be very careful. Again, as part of your post-project review or an after-action report, if you will, talk about what went well, what didn't go well. Does there need to be a change in your approach? And have those kind of 3 discussion points on that. The last thing is really important. You don't need to be heroic. The real thing that'll make your life easy is just being consistent. If you do it right a lot, you'll have good results. This can be in your daily operations. It could be when a project's going on, but as a face of the community and as people who are truly making a community exist, because there's no reason to live in a community without running water and sewers and good roads. the consistency and being able to be on point on things as much as you can will make your life easier and help you build public support for your projects and your future in your community. With that, thank you. And please reach out if you have any questions about Snyder & Associates or CIP Planning or communications planning and projects.
Thank you for listening to the Snyder & Associates webinar series, a civil engineering, planning, and design firm focused on thinking beyond engineering to improve the quality of life within the communities we serve. Find content related to this episode on snyder-associates.com.